And Major Garrett is at the White House for us. Major, let me begin by getting your key takeaway from President-elect Trump's whirlwind of a day in Washington yesterday. What stood out to you about his meeting with President Obama, as well as with House Speaker Paul Ryan?
Well, a couple of things. The President-elect's meeting with President Obama struck me in the sense that he was willing to have the press corps come in and listen to statements from the two of them. That's something he had to agree to, and that's an important moment for the country to hear both of them talk about each other and talk about the transition and working together. That is an enormously important way to communicate to the country that they are trying to find a way to heal the wounds from a very, very tough campaign. And Trump had to agree to do that. So that's one thing that I noticed. The other thing I noticed was his body language. He appeared, and through his voice, which I have quite understandably grown familiar with, was a little bit more halting, awed, if you will. I think he was legitimately overwhelmed by the Oval Office itself. Having been in there many times, I can tell you, it always overwhelms a normal person. And I think Trump began to feel part of the gravity that comes with all of the architecture of the White House, the history, the power, and the responsibility. And those things stood out for me. He was hunched over, his shoulders were he was a little like, wow, this is pretty big. And you don't want to read too much into that, but I did detect that all of that the White House is, and all that it invests in you as a president-elect and then president of the United States, began to get very real for President-elect Trump as he sat there and tried to express to the country what he thought about the person he had said repeatedly was either stupid or incompetent or the worst president in the history of our country. Well, that rhetoric has a vitality on the campaign trail, but it doesn't really work and has no place in the Oval Office when you're sitting next to the existing president and have joined the most exclusive political club in American life. And that was evident to me yesterday.
Yeah, Major, you know, I noticed the same things that you did. And when I saw that, I thought about something that you had said to us about how the job changes you. And it changes you almost right away. And I thought, geez, maybe that's what we're witnessing right here. And then we go to these anti-Trump protests that have continued to break out across the nation. And the president-elect's only sort of response so far has been through Twitter, something we've seen him do before. What do you make of how he's handling the unrest, at least at this point?
Well, you can't. I want to choose my words carefully here because I don't want to editorialize. The country can make its own mind about the two statements that Trump has made on Twitter. And they can make up their own mind about whether or not Twitter is the place to engage on this topic. But what is clear, what is evident, is that Trump is of two minds about what's happening, or those around him don't want him to be of the first mind that he expressed to the country, which is these are professional agitators egged on by the media, and it's unfair to him. That's what he said on Twitter. And when you're president-elect and when you're president of the United States, every single word you say is measured and weighed against fact and against temperament. That is a relentless level of scrutiny. And guess what? The American presidency is not interested institutionally or politically in what is or is not fair, at least not to the president. What the president does and how that is interpreted as fair or not is absolutely part of the job. But whether you're being treated fairly or not, guess what? Nobody cares. Because the presidency is the hardest job in American politics. It may be one of the hardest jobs in the entire world. And no one cries over a president who feels he's being treated unfairly. So that was the first response from President-elect Trump to this disorder in the streets, these protests. Then either he had a change of mind or those around him persuaded him to have a change of mind, say, oh, it's passion for democracy and we're all going to come together and it's great to see. It's one or the other. And oftentimes when you're president or president-elect, the first thing you say is what everyone remembers, because they quite rationally conclude that the second thing you say isn't what you really mean. It's what you've been persuaded to say to make up for what you first said. And I think that kind of analysis will be relentlessly held to Trump, because his supporters want to believe and did believe his first reaction to almost everything. And that's what they held on to. he's going to have to learn that the process of communication as president-elect is far more difficult than it was on the campaign trail.
That is a great point, Major. I want to ask you about staffing and cabinet positions that have yet to be filled. We know, based on your reporting, that President-elect Trump's campaign CEO, Steve Bannon, is under consideration for the chief of staff position. I mean, would you call him a favorite for the job at this point? And what does that say? Because he's a media executive. He's got a history in the media world. I wonder what it says, what kind of a message it sends.
Well, this is a big contest within the Trump inner circle, and there are really two paths here for President-elect Trump to take. And there is sort of a rearguard effort to put Steve Bannon in that position for a couple of reasons. His loyalty to President-elect Trump predates this campaign. They have long been friends and long been advocates of a similar approach to American politics, and very skeptical of everyone associated with the establishment, not just the Washington establishment, but also the Republican establishment. And if Steve Bannon is chosen for this position, the signal it will send is the loyalists to Trump and those who are in touch with the country and not with Beltway Republicans will be closest to Trump. Now, the rival to Steve Bannon for this job is the Republican National Committee Chairman, Reince Priebus, also in his own way loyal to Trump, but for not nearly the duration of time and not nearly as deeply in the foxhole, if you will, with Trump. And obviously, Reince Priebus, as the Republican National Committee Chairman, has attachments in every direction to the establishment. He might be the embodiment of the establishment. And so for Trump, this decision will come down to symbolism over who he believes could actually do the job and how he actually wants that job to be done. So this will be an early test of how feisty that President-elect Trump wants to be in his anti-establishment symbolism. And we'll find out. But I would say those are the two contenders, and Bannon being pushed into the conversation at this late date would suggest to me that's where Trump is leaning.
Major, before I let you go real quick, I want you to explain to our viewers what happened yesterday with the pool, the reporters that are technically or supposed to be traveling with the president. Tradition, historically, you've sat on the White House Correspondents Association. What is the protective pool? Explain that to our viewers.
So the protective pool is a group of reporters, print reporters, television journalists, magazine journalists, and still photographers. The number varies. It can be as small as 13. It can grow to 17, who travel with the president whenever the president leaves the confines of the White House. And this is also true of a president-elect. This is a tradition that grew out of the lack of reporters traveling nearby President John F. Kennedy the day he was assassinated in November of 1963. And by mutual agreement, those who cover the White House and the White House occupant, meaning the President of the United States, agree to have this arrangement. It takes a tremendous amount of time and logistical effort to keep these reporters visually in contact with the president whenever he leaves the compound of the White House, and oftentimes when he's here at the White House. This has also been true of the president-elect. What happened yesterday is the protective pool created by the journalism organizations was left behind by President-elect Trump in New York when he flew to Washington. They were on a separate flight. They landed in Washington much later, had very little visual contact with the president-elect. Then when they were in Washington, they were left behind again when he left for New York. And information about where he was, what he was doing, what his movements were unavailable to the protective pool. This is a signal that the president-elect is sending about the disregard he holds the obligation of American journalists to be near the president-elect and quite possibly the president. And if I were a network executive, if I was the leader of a wire service in this country, if I was the editor of an American newspaper anywhere in this country, I would be very alarmed, because this is an early signal, utterly consistent with what Trump did during the campaign, which was to disparage, humiliate, embarrass, and insult the media at every turn. And if he has that orientation as a candidate, my gut tells me he'll have that orientation as president-elect. This is serious business. And those at the top of journalism organizations in this country better understand there's a fight ahead.
Major Garrett at the White House. Thank you so much, Major.
Sure.